Antony, hello. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm ready for it to start raining again at some point soon, but other than that, I'm fine.
Fires suck for sure. Hot weather sucks. It's too
It's like
bad.
I can't even do anything outside.
Yeah.
Um, just to add to everything else.
Right. Exactly. Pandemic, fires. What else is there? I don't know. That's really it, really, right now.
Yeah, can't complain.
Yeah.
How are you?
So we want to talk about distribution today because
Distribute.
I was making the assertion um, that basically companies don't focus enough on the distribution of their product or service, and that by focusing on the distribution rather than focusing on what people tend to focus on, which I think uh, which is either the product itself, they spend too much time on the product or the utility of the product, or too much time around the brand of the product. And all of that, I mean, the product has to do its basic utility, but all of those two things can be trumped by great distribution. If you have great distribution as a company, you're going to get access, your business will be far more successful than others. And I would even say that the way that incumbents get beaten by upstarts is the upstarts discover new arbitrage opportunities in distribution. They figure out new ways to distribute their product or service. So I think distribution is the key.
Well, that's interesting because I mean, I guess the start with is that we talk a lot about how we live now in an attention economy, right? Distribution is easy, but attention is hard. But
Yes.
what you're saying is that distribution still like matters to it. It is.
Well, but in a way, attention really is addressed by the distribution challenge. I mean, think about it this way: there are uh, a huge number of consumer food products that you could buy. Like, there's just an unbelievable range of brands and sub brands and product types, and there are probably what 8 or 10,000 of those different products within a retail store. But that doesn't even account within a grocery store. But in that grocery store, those 8 or 10,000 products doesn't even constitute the a fraction of the total universe of food products that are available. So and when you're in that grocery store and you are walking down that aisle, that is when those companies really have your attention. Now, this applies to things outside of retail and outside of food, but it's the fact they have an opportunity to get your attention by being on the shelves in the store where you're walking down the aisle today. So I think attention is actually one of the things that's one of the major things that is addressed by distribution.
So just being there, being visible is what you're saying is a means of capturing attention.
Right, exactly. And I actually, the way I think of distribution is because it applies to more than just products. It can apply to services. It can apply to information. It's just about the your your product or the thing that you're selling. It could be a service, it could be information, it could actually be a physical product, but it's that being intersecting with the moment when your customer is likely to consider you because it fits within the context of what they're doing in their normal day. So think about, for example, one of the simplest examples is if you go to the grocery store and now you're going through the checkout, and then they have, those last little items, the candy bars and sodas and stuff that's right there. I mean, you might not even consider buying those things, but they know that in that moment, in that place, they have your attention. And the fact that it happens to be there at that moment where they have your attention, that they can sell quite a bit.
So okay, let's dig into that because there's two very different approaches to this, and the effect is the same, but how you get there, I think, are likely different. And maybe I'm wrong. You tell me. But like at the grocery store, those little point of purchase, stands or whatever. That's a pretty limited. That's a pretty set thing. Okay, the grocery store is putting it there, and I might be in line in front of you, and what might spark me to buy something at a point of purchase is going to be different than what might spark you to buy something at a point of purchase, but it's going to be the same options for both of us. How does that apply in a digital world where those things might change based on cookies, past buying experiences, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Like, is that anything that the person offering the product could really do anything about?
Yes. So first of all, let's in the retail environment, you have to understand that those products that end up there are not there by accident. They are rigorously tested what the sell through is of particular products when they put them in those areas. And you notice they do evolve over time. They have not only do they have seasonal items, but you'll see that it used to only be like candy, and now there's all kinds of other things. You might see like chapstick or whatever. But there's all kinds of things, and they are being renewed. So they're testing that area. They really are testing it, and I think that's important to know. And I think the other thing I think that's really important to know is that the limited attention and time that people have is true in this environment, in a retail environment, and it's true in a virtual environment too. I mean, what you are able to see as you're going through the physical aisle, as you're going, as you're shopping, is not unlike what imagine your Netflix screen. You can only see so much on it at a time. The catalog is enormous, but what is actually what your choice set is actually very limited because human attention is not that broad. So it's not that different, I don't think.
Okay. So in terms of, I don't know, like products itself, like there's physical products which I could buy in a physical location or in a virtual environment. You're saying that the distribution between those two are relatively the
Yeah,
same.
well, okay. So we are talking about attention. So let me back up a little bit and explain a little bit more. And I think
Please.
like the history of retail is a good it, like explains this pretty well. I think the um, as the West was settled in the United States, the Sears catalog was a huge innovation. Okay, it
Hmm.
was an incredible innovation for the families, for the people that were basically on the frontier, especially just their access to products that they had. So um, Sears, by innovating and coming up with a catalog where they actually sent it to people, it gave them distribution for their retail store. Essentially, it gave them the opportunity to sell. Just like as things evolved, having an anchor store in a mall gave you distribution for your brand, for your store, okay, for the retail store itself. And then within that store, there's a competition for distribution of particular products. But it's layers and layers of basically competition for distribution. And where the innovation and the opportunities abound, I think, for upstarts is trying to find different ways that you can find that intersection again of where your customer, the moment where they might consider your product, and and getting it in front of them. And that could be, in the old world, it could have been something as simple as buying a big Yellow Pages ad so that when someone is looking for plumbers, they see you. They see you. So you're being considered, properly within that context. And the Yellow Pages were a huge business for a long time. Ultimately, though, Google replaced it and other kinds of things replaced it. And I think that one thing I think is really important to understand that it's not necessarily about having your product in having resellers of it or having it in a particular retail store, although it could be that. A lot of times it is advertising. By advertising properly, you can find your customer in that right moment when they're actually considering what it is. And whether if you're advertising, it doesn't matter, frankly, if it's a physical product, a digital product, or if it's a service. It could be, the advertising is consumed in the same way.
So I mean, does something as simple as like SEO then apply to this as well? If someone's searching for something, then you want to be there, but that doesn't feel like distribution to me. So that's why I'm asking.
Well, it kind of okay. So I think it is distribution. I would consider that distribution because again, it's finding that moment when your customer is most likely, when a potential customer is most likely to be considering your product. Are you there for them? This is exactly the same thing as if you're walking down the grocery aisle looking for a box of cereal, and you look, and right at eye level will always be Cheerios. I mean, Cheerios pays for that spot, by the way, in the retail store, so that they aren't on the bottom shelf, and they aren't too high for the kids to see. Like that specific placement is chosen on purpose for them, and that distribution applies everywhere. So SEO is an example. Now, the thing is about this is where you see upstarts start to take over and take market share away from other companies is as these new methods of distribution, or let's focus on advertising in particular, as they emerge, if they are early to adopt them, if they take advantage of them first, if they are more nimble, then they can find a way to gain market share where basically it didn't exist before. So years ago, certainly SEO really mattered. Now, SEO, when I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but it's kind of like one of the things among 100 things that you must do if you're even showing up. Just like you'd have to have a business phone number. It's
Right.
really like that kind of a basic. It's no competitive advantage. It certainly doesn't. It is not. It's not going to get you ahead of any incumbent. That's for sure.
Let me share a personal experience with this, and you tell me how this fits in with the theory that you're trying to get across here. I like to cook, and so I'll type in I have certain outlets that I use. I have cookbooks, whatever, but I'm lazy, and so I have three ingredients. I know I need to use them because before they go bad, so I'll just type those three things in and see what pops up in terms of ideas for food. What I see, the first page, almost sometimes the first two pages, are these ridiculous personal food blogs that have popped up from every other schmuck in the world. A taste of yum, the white on rice couple, blah blah blah. And I'm like, I'd really rather see recipes from Savour, Bon Appetit, and Food and Wine, but that's like the third or fourth pages. And these are large, entrenched brands that kind of own that space for quite a while, and they're just getting, pun fully intended, their lunch completely eaten by just some woman in like Tulsa or something who with a blog. That blows
Right.
me away. I
Right.
don't
And I
understand
think,
how that happened.
well, the internet has definitely made it possible for upstarts to have a shot at succeeding. And I think that certainly in that way, by hustling, by understanding that where the game is won is not in selling magazine subscriptions, like maybe some of the other places that you're thinking of would have done it before, but the game instead is won and where they appear in the search engine of Google. And so by focusing on that method of distribution, by making sure that they are ranking higher than their competitors, there's they definitely can outshine them. They can get exposure that they wouldn't otherwise be able to. It's like if you're walking through the retail store, if some this, I love this granola, and from Colorado it's called Old Man granola. I think it's great, I love it. But it's like if Old Man granola had a Cheerios spot on the shelves. If it had its spot, it would definitely sell more. It would definitely get way more exposure to the customer than it otherwise would. And this is the same thing with the SEO. And I think that is a great example. And I think that where the biggest opportunities for companies emerge, though, is that is on the edge of that envelope of innovation. Focusing on SEO really has been something that people have done for I mean, almost two
Yeah.
decades now. But there are other advertising methods that one can use. And so I was talking to a friend of mine who has is a well-known newsletter publisher, and this guy has been, or newsletter writer really is what he is. And he's been writing a newsletter probably since the late 70s. I mean, a long time. And he was interviewed not long ago, just last week, in fact, by a guy on YouTube who he'd never heard of, but who a friend asked him if he would go on to his video podcast and do an interview with him. And afterwards, the next day, I was talking to him. He's like, "Have you ever heard of this guy?" And I'm like, "No, I've never heard of him." And he's like, "Yeah, it's weird because I think that I mentioned something in there, and then we had a bunch of sales of subscriptions to his newsletter or something." And so I'm on the phone with him, and I'm googling it, and I'm finding the guy on YouTube, and the guy's got 140,000 subscribers on YouTube, and the podcast that he did with my friend the day before had over 30,000 views already after 24 hours, and he was just dumbfounded by this. He's like, I mean, we've been in this business forever. This is fundamental. This guy's basically doing the same thing, and yet he has a big audience, relatively speaking, and I've never even heard of him. And I'm like, well, he is using a completely different distribution strategy. So whereas my friend is truly an expert in his field, like as much of an expert as one could be, this upstart guy is just eating his lunch. In terms of on the video platform, on YouTube, he's using that essentially as a vehicle to drive his business. He's because he's focused on how to succeed within that particular method of distribution. And so, do you have a question about that, or?
Well, yeah. So I have a couple questions actually.
Yeah.
I guess first of all, so we've both given a couple of examples for how this has been done and how it's possible. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts, recommendations on concrete steps to take to get there if you're someone listening who wants to achieve that same thing. And they might be different with physical versus virtual or whatever, but I'm just wondering if there's like any kind of a playbook, just generally, that we can discuss a little bit about how that might happen.
Well, I think um, there are lots of playbooks for how to get great distribution, and those playbooks can range from, how to have an outbound sales force, sales force that's really driving direct sales on a B2B basis, for instance. And there's clear playbooks on how to succeed like that. There's clear playbooks on how to do SEO. There's clear playbooks about direct mail. There's clear playbooks about all of these individual things. And I think my main point with this is that in order to experience business growth, what you should do is you should focus on what is another area where your product could be distributed. How do you shape your business or your product or your marketing of your product in such a way that you can increase the distribution? And by doing that, by changing the distribution, you can double the growth of your business in a way that you wouldn't be able to do organically by focusing on just trying to dial in better the one distribution strategy you have. For instance, I have some friends who built great businesses using Facebook advertising. Great businesses. I mean, businesses that were, you know, eight-figure businesses generating great, healthy profits for them, but they were always at the mercy of Facebook's ad platform. You know, preferences, and they changed over time, and they never were able to find another way to be another distribution channel because the skills, frankly, that they needed to be successful in Facebook advertising, um, you know, and getting their product in front of people through Facebook advertising just really didn't apply in other areas as well. And so they just got stuck. And yet, you know, their business could have been, I think, 10, well, they certainly could have been 2 or 3 times bigger if they could have added one other distribution strategy to what they were doing. Could be retail, you know, maybe it was retail. Maybe it's just an Amazon sales effort. I don't know, just getting on Amazon. But I think the key thing is looking, how are other people distributing similar products, and can we model that? Can we copy what they're doing? You know, and can we get on the edge of the innovation curve? And as these new ways are approaching, or these new things that come up constantly.
Okay, so the channels may differ. I mean, basically there's different playbooks depending on the channel, and the channel is going to depend on where are your customers, where do they live, and how do you get there. So one is to kind of try to do some research on your customers, you know, where they live, both you know, in the real world and online. And maybe one way of doing that, if it's somehow difficult or you can't tell, is to look where your competitors are,
Right.
and you're there as well. Make sure you're there better.
The thing is that most of the time people are only aware of their competitors that exist in the channel that they already are experienced in. And
Right.
so what you're referring to as channel, I'm thinking it as just a different distribution method.
Okay.
And so the like for my friend, he's like, we're so siloed. We're so siloed. I don't even like how do I not know this guy exists? You know, considering he has this big audience, I know everybody, but I don't know this guy because he only knows one channel. And so getting out of that channel, looking outside of that channel for other distribution is the key. And the other thing is that all the new innovation for new channels or new distribution, they the biggest opportunities are really as those emerge. So whether it's a new platform like, you know, TikTok, you know, really figuring out how do we use TikTok to grow our customer base. And people first will, with anything new, they always poo-poo it. They think it's silly and dumb. It's not worth the effort. But you know, there are businesses that can be built around, you know, using TikTok as a distribution channel. You know, there are certainly, you could do the same thing for Snapchat. You could do the same thing for obviously Instagram and Facebook. You could also do the same thing for a chain of retail stores. You could also do direct marketing, you know, like direct mail. There's lots of other channels you can do, but the key is not to stick to one only.
Okay, that's interesting. And the key is also to pay more attention outside your own universe. And I think that's something that can be that's true for lots of different parts of a business. I mean, people tend to focus on, you know, how are people talking about me? How are people talking about my product? How are people talking about my company? And that's useful but limiting. You need to look at, you know, as a company, you operate in a certain space. You should be focusing on how people are talking about that space, particularly if they're talking about that space and not you, because
Right.
that's the hole that you then need to aim for. That's your new target. And I talk
Exactly.
about that from a PR perspective, communications perspective, but I'm seeing the parallels here very, very clearly in terms of how you could make more business decisions on that as well. And people just don't do that.
No, they don't. And I think people always resist moving into new channels. And of course, Apple is used as an example for everything, and you can find, you know, every possible business success within Apple's history, I guess. Um, but their effort when they went into retail, like that's not what they did. And so they're like, well, you know, they were looked at by everybody, whether it be Wall Street analysts to, you know, their customer base. I mean, to certainly their retail partners, they were looked at like this is a stupid mistake. It's egregiously expensive what you're investing in these stores, and and yet it turned out that at least over a period of time they were the most profitable per square foot retail in America. And by choosing, and so they again, a distribution strategy is about getting your product, having it intersect with the moment when your customer might consider it. And I think, and they use their retail stores wonderfully to do that. Wonderfully. And retail is something that no one thought would be successful. Everyone was retreating from retail, and yet they were investing heavily in the operations there.
So that brings up another question I have, which is about control of that distribution. So now, Apple sold its products through certain channels that didn't control. It opened its own retail store, which it did control, and it was successful. We've talked a little bit before about Facebook and how it changes the rules for those people that rely on that platform for distribution to a certain extent. And heck, I'll even bring it back to Apple again. The Apple App Store. We're seeing some lawsuits now about brands and companies that are suing Apple because of the way that it chooses to operate its platform. So, like, how do you deal with that? I mean, like, that's important, I think.
My son was actually interviewed on a radio show last week, which was kind of fun for him to do. And this radio show, it's like got some terrestrial distribution, and the guy is a great guy, and he's been doing this radio show for probably 15 years. Now, because he was so concerned with owning the channel, he refused to ever publish anything he did on on YouTube. Nothing. He wouldn't put anything there. He doesn't like Google. Didn't want anything to do with it. Never put anything up there. So what it did is it made it so yeah, he owns and controls his own website. So if you want to stream it, you have to go to his website for it. If you're not within the terrestrial limits of the radio station. But think about what he missed out on: the opportunity to dramatically grow his audience over the years, especially in the early days of YouTube when there really wasn't great content on there. It was just a cat videos and stuff like that, right? It was very limited at first, and he was doing what Joe Rogan is doing. Uh, he could be Joe Rogan, because if he would have published it in a channel that was growing and with wide adoption, but instead wanting to control it too much, it hurt him. It hurt him a lot. Now, on the other side, of course, if you're too dependent upon one platform, you can get shut down. So it is a delicate balance between those two. But I think any ideology about, you know, um, there's no need to have owner control your own platform is wrong. And any ideology that says, that I have to have everything on my platform so that I have total control is also wrong. Again, it's about your customers. Where are your customers? So use the tools and the channels that are out there and see what you can do. And even with the retail example of Apple, I mean, they did it to control their distribution, to control the retail channel, and they did. But there's a lot of things they didn't control. Still, they can't control the flow of traffic, the other businesses that are next to them. They don't own the real estate; they're merely leasing it. I mean, there's all kinds of. No one ever has total control anyway. Anyway, so I think just recognizing where a channel can shine and how it can really help you find that intersection again is what matters.
And I think diversifying it, I think, is really the message you're getting across too. Like you mentioned, your friends that built their business on Facebook, and as the Facebook rules change, they failed to adapt.
Yep.
So it's like not putting all your cliche about eggs in one basket and whatnot. Like basically, you need to your customers live in more than one place, even the places that are harder to reach than Facebook, at least at one time was. Make the effort to be in those other places.
And I talked about this before, but briefly, but it's worth mentioning again. My friends who built a great business that was primarily driven by the distribution and through Facebook advertising, um, they were able to build that business because they were really innovative at first. They were early adopters of Facebook's advertising stuff, and so they became very, very good at it. The problem with that is that you become so myopic essentially in that distribution channel, and it eventually kills you. So some other upstart, some competitor will have that same innovative approach, find a platform early, especially when it comes to advertising, because at first on any ad platform, the ads are cheap. They're really inexpensive, and basically because the flood of advertisers has not yet come to the platform. So you're paying much lower rates than you will end up paying a year from now. So you get a lot of room for error and experimentation. And and if you can build up that expertise then with that extra margin of error, then you can really exploit that over time.
Yeah.
But if you're not willing to switch channels or to really be innovative on another channel, then the odds are you will eventually be usurped.
See, I'm glad you brought that up because earlier when we were talking, I actually wrote this down in my notes to ask you. And my notes, it says take versus protect, right?
Mm.
That's what we're talking about, right? There are times where you're the upstart and you're taking the share away from others. But once you do that, you need to think about either taking the next thing or protecting what you've got because someone else is coming along to try to take from you. And so it's this constant sort of, there's really no treading water. There's really no, okay, I'm here. I'm just going to live here now.
It's sink or swim. Yeah, to take that analogy one step further, yeah, that's exactly what it is. It is, and I think you're either growing or you're dying. Like that's the way it goes, and you have to being innovative is key to business. Now, as you get what a lot of big companies try and do is they try and protect their markets. They try and create more regulations, or they essentially like big food producers will, for instance, what they'll do is they'll buy all the small brands, so they essentially own the entire shelf. So no matter what you choose, you're choosing them. That's
Choosing a
one way
version of
people
them. I may
exactly
not know that, but that's what's happening.
exactly. So that's a lot of times what they do because they realize controlling that shelf space is the game they're playing. That's the game, and they really don't know how to succeed in the in the virtual environment where you're in e-commerce. I mean, it's these because they realize that most customers don't have a strong preference for one brand or another. Not really. It's just like what's there. It's just what's there.
That's what's there. So we've just to get back to sort of the word distribution for a second. When we first started talking about distribution, in my mind, I was thinking actually getting things from point A to point B, like physically moving products or even digitally moving ideas, right? We've talked a lot about advertising and sort of being sort of back to the awareness component of it, right? But does the actual moving of things from A to B fall into what we're talking about and or what you're thinking right now?
No, not really, because it's with physical products and the traditional retail world, the way that decisions are made is that people are looking through the browsing aisles, they're seeing something on the shelf and they're grabbing it, or they're trying on a pair of jeans, that they see in the store. So the distribution essentially is a form of uh, distribution. Essentially, having your physical products in that place at that time is where you would create that intersection. Now, in the virtual world, it's totally different, and which you see lots of, which is it's been great for innovation. The fact that retail space, which is so limited, is now not now the driving factor of what brands get included in someone's decision or not. But what is driving whether or not the decision is factored in is that brand's other attempts to get it on people's radar, essentially at the point where they might be making a decision, and whether that's through advertising, whether that's through on getting it, making sure it's available on Amazon because just a lot of people are there. There's a lot of different things that the companies could be doing, but I distribution is really fundamentally um, for physical products. It's not really any different. I just see it as an information product or as a service. It's just about that intersection.
So getting it there is one thing. Getting the there, right, the store to in some fashion feature it, that's the rub. Right? You're always
Well,
going to be to get it
Well,
there.
and even if the truth is, if you get it in the store at all, you're already better than 9 out of 10 of your competitors, right?
Right.
So
No, I know a guy. He started up a beef jerky brand, and just trying to get it. Like he had the idea. It's got a cool name. He does a lot of crazy like stuff to kind of market it and things like that. But like getting it in the store is like it was like, but he's succeeded. But it was a really
yeah,
big boulder moving up a very steep hill. I mean, without
right.
a doubt, right?
And as soon as that happened, all of a sudden now, if it's working in the store, they expand it to multiple locations, and it can get bigger and bigger that way. And it's not necessarily the best margin, but or as maybe direct to consumer would, but direct that doesn't even the point. The point is that you're getting it in a point where if I'm walking down the beef jerky aisle of the grocery store, that it's among the options that I'll actually consider, which is the point. That's the point of distribution. So it's that intersection point. Now there are other things he could be doing, but for a lot of products, there's no better way, a consumer, like especially in food products, there's no better way to have those products be considered than to have them in a grocery store, because still, as you know, we habitually, that's where we make those decisions, walking down the aisle.
So really, it was, I started off by asking you, distribution is easy, but attention is hard. Really, what we're talking about is attention. I mean, that's basically it. It's attention in terms of, am I in a place where your attention is focused so that I have an opportunity to get your attention. That's just in terms of just being there. But I guess maybe my last question that I could think of right now, anyway, is there seems to be a step before that where if you do have the opportunity to have that attention, that you're capturing it fully. So I guess I mean things like, if you are a new, beef jerky product, and you're in the line of all the other beef jerky things, your name, your design, something has to stand out in a way that captures the attention, instead of just being, yet another beef jerky company. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Is that part of, is that a different topic to get into, or?
I no, I think it's definitely worth just talking about briefly. Sorry, someone's car alarm's going off if you can hear it. There's like this, there's all kinds of iteration and improvement you can do once you have distribution there. So where that might be, like, product packaging is essential within the retail environment. Not just the label, but like the way the product is. If you're selling like like I had a baby bathtub business. I was a shareholder in for a long time, and they made these really great little tubs for really new babies that when you wash them in the sink, and they're super slippery, and it was elegant, it was beautiful, and they had distribution in Target stores. And once they got the distribution in Target stores, the game was like, how do you get better shelf space? And you get better shelf space by having better packaging, and better packaging, so it takes up less space on the shelf, and so that it actually, a customer can touch it. For instance, in their case, they could put their fingers through the cardboard box and actually feel what it felt like and imagine it. And that actually really helped with the sell through. On in a virtual environment, it could be your ads, the specifically, like, what images you use, like what copy you're using. Those things make a huge difference. But, like, let's say, for instance, if I have a list of a million, well, let's say 10,000 high net worth individuals who love surfing. Okay. If I have an email list of 10,000 of these people, and you know, and for whatever reason, I know that these guys that this is what that group is. Um, and my product is a new surfboard or a new something that helps you catch better waves somehow. Let's just say everyone's better with this. So I've got the best product.
Uh,
But now the ad I use to get I have the best product, and I have this list of the ideal customer. The ad I use is important, but it's not nearly as important as that list is, and having the product that's relevant to them. So I can dicker around with the headline on the copy and the text and all that, but the list itself, that distribution from that list, is the most important of all of them. So it's like, I always, in marketing, I always think of it as, list is most important, then the offer is second. So think of offer as product in this case,
mm.
and the copy is third. So we focus a lot on copy. Copy could be, in this case, the packaging or the text or imagery that you might use. But the list is what matters most. Without the list, none of the other stuff even matters. None of the other
It's
stuff
the
even
it's
matters.
the it's the soil that you're planting the seed in. Is the
Exactly. Exactly.
Maybe grand reference. And as a copy guy, fuck you, but still.
I get it. I get it. I love great copy. I love great text. It's wonderful.
Joking, of course. But like, just going back to the distribution part for a second, it made me think of something that I covered when I was at Billboard, which was the music game space. Right. The reason that space created, it was really big for a while, but they're going, because to your point, the packaging was terrible. It was, you had these big, like, box, like, these are stores that sell CD, case size video games, and you're asking them to put in a package the size of like a Coleman cooler, and and that's what happened. It just wouldn't work. They wouldn't carry enough of them. They didn't have enough of them in the space, and it was too expensive. And there's a bunch of licensing stuff we can talk about as well, which we won't. But like that's, thinking back on it through the lens that you've kind of outlined today, um, really makes it clear why that fad went away so quickly, because the
Mm,
distribution was unsustainable.
mm. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So yeah, my main point is, if you are a business owner and you have something that's working, so you've got a channel, you've got an advertising campaign, you've got distribution, whatever label you want to put on it, but you've got at least one example where this intersection between your product or service and the customer intent, when they really match up, when you have one of those things working and you're looking and trying to grow your business, that instead of thinking about how you can, the default is, well, if we get another product and we push it into that channel, that could help. Now,
Oh,
sometimes that's a low hanging fruit. Sometimes it is. Or otherwise you think, well, maybe we can tweak our copy or tweak our messaging, or, in this channel, and we can scale that channel. And sometimes, again, that makes a lot of sense and that can work. But I think where your competition, new competition will form, and where you could be totally left behind, is when somebody enters into with a new distribution channel. They step into something new entirely. And if you are able to do that with your business, if you're able to go from what's working now in your business and adapt it somehow to some totally new channel, then you can unlock value that's very difficult to imagine right now.
so lastly, then, is there any? I have to ask all the time. Any books, articles, videos, anything that anyone could follow up with to learn more about some of these steps?
This one I really don't have. There's not a lot that I have. It's not actually anything that comes to mind in terms of books or anything. I just it's a common thing in marketing to think, as I mentioned before, the list, the offer and the copy. And I just think that that application, just switched a little bit to think about it in terms of distribution, I think is where the money's at. And I think really people
Okay,
should be focusing there.
so it's just a mindset thing then. Okay, great. Well, that's helpful. Thanks very much.
Great. All right. Thanks, Anthony.